I wrote a book called Drop the Ball that was released on Valentine's Day this year. And a couple of weeks before the book was released, I got a phone call from my daughter's school. She was in the second grade last year. She's in the third this year. It was from the nurse. My daughter was in the nurse's office and she was crying uncontrollably. She was perfectly okay, except that after school, all of her friends had went off to a birthday party that she knew nothing about. And if you can remember being in the second grade, you can imagine how devastating it was for her. She was invited to the birthday party. It's just that it didn't make it onto my calendar or my husband's calendar, so we didn't know to tell her about the party. I need to admit to all of you that that was not the first time that this exact scenario has played out in my home, a child being very upset because they missed a birthday party that didn't get on the calendar. Furthermore, I should also say that like many women, I can always anticipate when something like this is going to happen, that there's something I could do to prevent this scenario from happening, but that I don't. I intentionally drop the ball. Before you start throwing tomatoes at me because I must be a very evil person, certainly a very bad mom, I would love to spend a few minutes just taking you back in time to explain how I could get to this moment in my life where I could stand on this stage and tell this story and have a smile on my face and not feel 1 ounce of the G word, which is guilt, for all of you guys in the room who may not know what that is. My life's work is advancing women and girls. That's pretty much why I'm on the planet. My life is simple. I know what's on my tombstone. I'm just kind of project managing my life backwards. And for most of my career, I've been pretty obsessed with solving this one problem that I'm so happy we're talking about today, which is not having enough women at the highest levels of leadership. For most of that time, I've been focused on what I call collective solutions to the women's leadership conundrum, which is that basically we're half the population. This chart shows that we enter the workforce at the same rate that men do, but by the time we get to the highest level, which in corporate America is the C-suite, we're at about 18 or 19%. And this is true pretty much across every sector of our society. I've been focused on things like equal pay for equal work, the public policies that the deputy mayor talked about that we should all support, corporate practices like workplace flexibility, creating cultures where we can all bring our full selves to the table. But in 2013, I had a couple of experiences that caused me to think a little bit differently about this problem and that led to me writing this book called Drop the Ball. In 2013, Lean In came out. I was on the launch team for Lean In, and I was a big ambassador for it. And as a result, I did a lot of public speaking that year. And I started to make an observation because I stood on many stages, largely talking at women's conferences and events to large groups of women. And the observation I started to make was that irregardless of the 40 minutes that I spent talking about all of these collective solutions to women's leadership, whenever I stopped talking and I opened it up for the Q&A, the first set of questions that I would always get were personal questions that to me had nothing to do with what I had just spoken about. Okay? So literally a woman would raise her hand and she would say, yes, so when you were talking, you said something about your daughter who's 5, and you mentioned your son who's 8, and your husband. I think you said he's in Dubai, but you're in San Francisco with us, and you live in New York, and you're gonna be in Baltimore tomorrow. And I like your dress, and you seem happy and healthy, and you have this career that's all about your passion and your purpose. And I read your bio, it's pretty impressive, and you even look like you have time to go to the gym or something. And I've just been sitting here wondering, like, what the hell? How are you doing all of this? How do you manage it all? It's probably the most popular question that successful women get. And I would look around at the audience after this question was asked, and the whole crowd would be like, yeah, I don't know what she's been talking about for 40 minutes, but I had the same exact question. I've just been sitting here trying to figure this out. And so I came up with this one-liner to respond to this question. And keep in mind, I was always talking to a sea full of women. And I would say, oh, I just expect way less from myself and way more from my husband than the average woman. And that would get just enough laughs that I could move people on to what I felt were much more substantive issues, like equal pay for equal work. One day, though, I had what I now call a Tiffany's Epiphany, which is I stepped back from the podium and a bit of a voice said, Tiffany, women are not asking you how do you manage it all because they care about the details of your personal business that you don't want to tell them. They're asking you how do you manage it all because they're sitting there in the seat wondering, how am I going to manage it all? And if your life's work really is advancing women and girls, then you owe them a better answer to the question. Simultaneously in 2013, I had reached a level in my career where I was getting lots of emails, I get them now on social, from women saying, I would love to connect with you. I would love to sit down and talk. I'd love to learn more about your story. I'd love to get some advice. And in 2013, I did something very counter to my drop the ball philosophy, which is I decided to say yes to every single woman that reached out to me. And I started meeting women on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 9, 10, and 11. I still do it today. I've met with over 1,000 women. And it's been the most remarkable part of my life and my learning, because it turns out that when you stop just talking to women, like I'm doing now, when you stop just talking about women, which I tend to do a lot of, and you actually sit down and listen to women one-on-one to their stories, the reason why we don't have as many women at the highest levels of leadership becomes so much more obvious. We're really, really busy, okay? And one of the interesting correlations that I found in my conversations with women is this direct one between a woman's ambition, her desire to want to achieve this highest level of leadership, and all of the responsibilities that she feels in other areas of her life. On the home front. And what's most fascinating about this is it's irregardless of a woman's status, okay? I met with young women who were just getting into the workforce, who were having high levels of anxiety and making decisions about their career based on future anticipation of caregiving responsibilities they did not have at the moment. Do you have a boyfriend? No. Do you have a girlfriend? No. Do you have any kids? No. But one day I will, and so I need to get it together now, okay? I met with young women who were feeling an enormous amount of economic pressure in relationship to their families, who had sacrificed tremendously for them to even go to college. And they had levels of shame because they were working with people who were getting loans from their parents, but they were worried about paying their parents' mortgage or their rent. I met with women who were dealing with caregiving at the opposite end of the spectrum. They had parents who become ill or incapacitated. There's even the group of women that I think are the most interesting, the ones who have decided not to have children and have actually made this preference public. It turns out that if you're a woman in our society who has decided you don't want to have kids, people think you have nothing else to do. And so you just get assigned more work. At work, you get assigned more work by families trying to be benevolent and giving auntie so-and-so things to do. So basically, everyone was feeling an enormous amount of pressure. I decided that, you know what, I'm going to have to answer this question that I keep getting asked. And I'm going to have to answer it in an honest way. But in order to do that, I was going to have to reveal my dirty feminist secret, which was that for all of my career, I had been this staunch advocate for women's empowerment and the disruption of gender stereotypes in the public sphere. But at home, I didn't question gender stereotypes at all. In fact, at home, I was pretty much on Stepford Wife autopilot. And my Stepford Wife autopilot was made more complicated by the fact that I had a very bad case of what I call HCD, home control disease. This is basically when you feel that everything under your roof should be done a particular way, which is your way. I used to, for example, cook all of the time, which meant that there were always leftovers in the refrigerator. Let's say on Monday I made meatloaf, and on Tuesday I made fajitas, and on Wednesday I made fried chicken. On Thursday, if I was at a work event and my husband was home alone eating dinner, I would expect him to eat the meatloaf first, okay? Because I would have this running expiration date in my head for all of the leftovers that were in the refrigerator. And when I came home and opened the refrigerator and he'd eaten the chicken, I would be annoyed. And he would pick up on that. And he would say, "What's wrong, babe?" And I would say, "You ate the chicken." And he would say, "But I like your chicken." And I would say, "So you don't like my meatloaf?" And then he would know not to say anything after that. Okay, now, this may seem very small and insignificant, the difference between meatloaf and fried chicken when we have bigger things to worry about, like equal pay for equal work. But what turns out to be very small things actually adds up to an enormous amount of what we now call emotional labor, household labor. I used to think that all of the hangers in my closet should face the same direction, and I would go back and fix them when people didn't put them in correctly. I used to think that all of the towels in the linen closet should be folded a certain way, and I would host tutorials to try to help people understand how to fold them. I felt very strongly that all of the mail should be retrieved from the mailbox every day. You should recycle the advertisements. You should open up each envelope and deal with what was inside, because if you didn't, it was going to add up, and then guess who was going to have to deal with it? Okay? I especially felt that if someone ever invited you to a birthday party, that you should respond right away so that no one thought that you were being rude and so that you didn't miss the party. Now, I want to be really clear that this entire time I had a very bad case of HCD. I didn't think of myself as being on Stepford Wife autopilot. I thought of myself as a very modern and empowered woman. And what happened was not that I came up with this amazing strategy for how to drop balls. Basically, I had a life-changing event, which was the birth of my first child. It could be a lot of different things. I've had many stories of women for whom their job was the thing that caused them to drop the ball, or someone becoming sick caused them to drop the ball. For me, it was my first child. And even if you don't have kids, if you've ever been in a room with a small child, you could imagine that that combined with my level of HCD basically meant my world went into a tailspin. And what happened was that the person who was always obsessed with never dropping a ball started dropping them left and right. And the miraculous thing that happened was that Armageddon never really hit. Like, no one ever called me to tell me they didn't love me anymore. No one came to arrest me because those bright orange parking citations piled up because I didn't move the car for alternate side parking. Like, none of these things happened. And so the person who used to think that dropping the ball was very bad, I used to think that dropping the ball meant that I was failing to take timely action, that I was disappointing myself, that I was disappointing other people. In my personal case, I was disappointing the entire Black race. I decided to reappropriate the term altogether. So for me now, dropping the ball means that I've let go of these unrealistic expectations around what it means to have to do all of these things to begin with. And when I started really questioning, why are you feeling all of this pressure? There were really 3 balls that I figured out how to drop that I want to share with you really quickly today. The first ball was that I had to release these unrealistic expectations about who I was supposed to be. All of us enter our lives playing certain roles. If you're a woman, your first role is probably daughter. If you're a man, it's probably son. If you have siblings, you become a brother or a sister, friends, students, workers, wives, mothers, citizens. And if you're an ambitious person, you by default put the word good in front of all of your roles. Okay, so it's not sufficient to be a daughter, you strive to be a good daughter. Okay? If you are a student, you can't just be a student, you want to be a good student. And one of the things that I've learned in connecting with so many women is that even though we were born in different parts of the world, different family, different values, different cultures, somehow we all ended up with pretty much the same job description for what it means to be a good anything. I'm the oldest of 4 girls, and in my good sister job description, it says that I need to respond to my little sister's text messages within 2 minutes. I left my phone back there because it's probably blowing up with messages about how I need $100. Okay? In the good mom job description, there's a line that literally says you need to be physically present when your child takes their first steps. I cannot tell you the number of women who have come into my booth. They're really stressed out. They have a work event that they need to travel for. They know as soon as the plane takes off, their 1-year-old is going to start walking, and they will have missed the entire event, and it will have meant that they were a very bad mother. Okay? This is despite the fact that not one person in this room can tell me that you remember who was there when you took your first steps, but somehow this is a very important event that makes a tremendous difference in the life of a child. One of the most insidious lines in a job description is that for a good husband, a good father. There's a line that says, you need to aspire to be a breadwinner at all costs. even the cost of meaningfully engaging with your family. And I hope that someone writes a book about how men can drop that ball, because I think that it would make a big difference for women and for the world. So I had to move from a place where I was essentially living out these job descriptions to really getting clear about what mattered most to me. And at the end of my journey, I was really clear that what mattered most to me was advancing women and girls, surprise, surprise, raising conscious global citizens, and nurturing a really healthy partnership. But that wasn't enough. Once I was clear about what mattered most to me, I also had to figure out how to drop this unrealistic expectation about what I was supposed to do. I used to be I was about to say a list whore. That's probably a very bad term for it. I had a lot of lists, and I had them organized in all kinds of different ways. I no longer have lists. It's made my life a lot easier. But I was always obsessed with what I was supposed to do before I understood that what you do is far less important than the difference you make. I once did a workshop. It was supposed to be a time management workshop with about 80 women. We didn't get that far because the first exercise I asked everyone to do was to write down everything they expected to complete in an ideal day. And I mean every single little thing. So if you get up in the morning and you go to the gym, you write that down. If you wake up and you're just lying in bed thinking about how you should be at the gym, you write that down because that takes time, okay? Getting yourself dressed, walking the dog, getting other people ready, every single little thing until you can't think of anything else. And I had another Tiffany's Epiphany as I was walking around the tables as a facilitator, because I asked everyone to write down how long they thought it would take them to complete each item and then to sum it at the bottom. And not one woman in the room had a sum that amounted to less than the 24 hours any of us have in a day. Some of the women didn't even have sleep on their list. And it occurred to me that there's no wonder we're all walking around with such feelings of inadequacy, as if we can't get it all done and there's just too much to do, because we can't. We literally can't physically accomplish what it is we expect to complete even in an ideal day. And so I had to move from being pretty frenetic about just checking things off of a list to getting really clear about what my highest and best use is in achieving what matters most to me. And that was a long process, but one that was enormously rewarding. The last ball that I had to drop is an ironic ball for me, which is this fear of asking for help. And it's ironic for me because I love helping people. I'm obsessed with helping people. But I really used to suck at getting the help that I needed. A lot of it was ego. I didn't want to be vulnerable. But eventually I learned how to get help. And one of the people that I learned how to get help from was my husband, Kojo. Drop the Ball is largely a memoir about how I got him off the couch. It's like a romantic comedy. And one of the things that I delegated to Kojo was managing our kids' social calendar. Okay, this is largely a task that often falls to very busy working moms, but I've discovered that it should actually be handled by the person in the relationship who is the social butterfly, who is the social maven, and he does an extraordinary job. The problem is that our world hasn't quite evolved for evolved families. It's certainly evolved women. And one example is that no one ever sends a child's birthday party invitation to their dad. Okay, it always comes to the mom, regardless of what list you're on. Sometimes I commit a little tiny act of defiance and I email it back to the person and I say, thank you so much for inviting my daughter to the party. Her father is her calendar maven. Can you please email him at, and then I give his email address. But on most days, when, like many of you, I have a ton of emails in my inbox that haven't been read, I've got text messages from my little sister, I've got Slack messages from all of my millennial colleagues at Levo, I've got meetings that I need to go to and people that I need to respond to. And yes, another advertising billboard telling me that I need to be even skinnier and have longer hair and have bigger boobs or something. I have to ask myself my drop the ball question, which is fill in the blank, responding to this email, this invitation, your highest and best use toward fill in the blank, raising a conscious global citizen? And for me, the answer is no. And I just move on. And that's how we end up with a phone call at 3 p.m. from my daughter's school and a crying second grader who missed the birthday party. You saw a picture of my daughter. This is my daughter, Akua. Fortunately, she is made very happy by one of two things. Either one of these pink donuts from Dunkin' Donuts with the sprinkles, or bacon. If you bring her bacon or one of these, she's pretty much all good. And that night, I did bring her one of these donuts. I didn't feel guilty because I hadn't committed a moral transgression, but I had an enormous amount of empathy because I remember when I was in the second grade and it really would have sucked to have missed a birthday party. I've been telling this story now since Valentine's Day. And inevitably, a woman always comes up to me, maybe even two, to say, I really get this whole idea of dropping the ball, but the whole birthday party thing, I mean, I just couldn't do it. And I want you to know that if that's you, I am literally giving you a hug from the stage because I completely get it. It's just that I personally can't go back now. In the 7.5, 8 years since I've dropped the ball, I've been able to run a national women's leadership organization that's trained thousands of women to run for office. There's a lot of anxiety in the world right now, but I happen to know that there's a very fierce pipeline of women leaders. I've been able to help grow the fastest growing network for millennial professionals that's helping women create lives that they're passionate about and elevate their careers. I've been able to help raise millions of dollars for organizations that I think are doing really great work, especially building girls of confidence and character. I've even had time to sit in coffee shops and write a book about it. And if any one of those things helps to create a world in which my Ekua can be whatever she chooses to be, and she can live her passion and her purpose, and she can do it unencumbered by all of these crazy, unrealistic expectations about who we're supposed to be, then for me, that future world is worth her missing a couple of birthday parties. Okay? That's my story. I'm sticking to it, and I want to thank you all for your time.